In campaign 2018 Local Matters, we're taking a look at Massachusetts, where incumbent Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren is running for re-election. But Warren is also widely considered one of the leading contenders for her party's presidential nomination if she chooses to run in 2020. And covering all things Massachusetts is Shira Schoenberg. She's a political journalist for the Springfield Republican. She joins me now from Boston. Thank you so much for joining us, Shira.
Thanks for having me on your show.
You bet. And so before we get to Senator Warren, and I want to get to her in a minute, but let's sort of set the scene first with this Republican primary coming in September. Who really are the candidates?
So there are three Republican candidates vying to run against Senator Warren. There's Jeff Deal. He's a conservative state representative, and he actually managed President Trump's campaign in Massachusetts. There's John Kingston, who's an attorney and a businessman, and who kind of prides himself on being an independent voice, someone calling for civility in politics. And then there's Beth Lindstrom, who is a businesswoman who is kind of made her way up in Republican Party politics. She's a former chairwoman of the state Massachusetts Republican Party. She was part of Governor Mitt Romney's cabinet in Massachusetts.
And is there, Shira, a favorite among the three?
There really isn't. Each of them appeals to different constituencies, you know, the Trump supporters, the independents, the party faithful, and polling actually puts them all three of them in pretty similar places, which is, 25 to 30 points behind Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear you say. When you're looking at the numbers in 2016, President Trump received a little under 33% of the vote in Massachusetts compared to Hillary Clinton, who got 60%. How is the president viewed in the state, and are Republican candidates associating themselves with Mr. Trump?
So President Trump is viewed awfully in Massachusetts. His approval rating has hovered somewhere in the 20 or 30% range. So polling shows that voters really, really dislike the job that the president is doing. And I think the candidates are different. Jeff Deal was, as I said, Trump's former campaign manager here. So he's really aligned himself with the president. He's portrayed himself as a very strong supporter of the president. Kingston has emphatically said he is not with the president, that he'll really be an independent voice who could, speak up for the party even when he disagrees with the president. And Beth Lindstrom is taking somewhat of a more middle-of-the-road tactic, saying she can work with the president, but she'll also oppose him when she feels she has to.
And we know that whoever wins this primary will go on to face Senator Elizabeth Warren in the November general election. Is there any chance that Warren doesn't easily win re-election? Is she on solid footing?
Not much of a chance. Anything's possible in politics. But, Elizabeth Warren is really a national figure, but she's also very popular in Massachusetts. We have a very liberal state overall. Republicans are, very much in the minority. And I think all three of the Republican opponents are really struggled to get name recognition, build up their fundraising. None of them have that national fundraising ability that Elizabeth Warren has. And as I mentioned, polling shows that they're just really far behind her right now.
Mm-hmm. And you say she's able to really fundraise well. What are people saying about 2020? Is she a potential candidate? Are you hearing anything on that front?
Well, she's saying she's not, but everybody else is saying she is. So make what you will of that. I think even if you look at Senator Warren's actions, there's no question she has her expertise in domestic and economic policy. But we've seen recently she's starting to try to burnish her foreign policy credentials. She took a recent trip to Iraq. She's really been out front in criticizing President Trump on things like immigration. We even saw last night she came out as an immediate no vote for President Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. So it looks like she's positioning herself to at least consider a presidential run.
We know she's a very trusted vocal opponent of the president. She always comes forward really voicing concern with the president's legislation. Is she well positioned, though, to take on the president in a national election?
I think that's a really good question, because I think she is certainly a strong critic of President Trump from the left. I mentioned she is kind of building up her credentials. But I think the big question is, although she has this national profile, she's a national figure, the question is whether the party wants someone so far to the left to take on the president, or whether Democrats might be better served finding someone who's more moderate and who can appeal to, independents and centrist Democrats rather than the left of the party. And I think that's really the question that the party is going to have to answer for itself.
So, Shira, would you say that's her biggest vulnerability at this point? Her biggest liability is that she's so far to the left? Is that what the Democratic Party wants?
I think it is. I think she might have trouble drawing from independents. Actually, if you look at Massachusetts history, we have a really long history of failed presidential candidates, whether you're talking Mitt Romney, John Kerry, Michael Dukakis. And I think that's because sometimes the type of East Coast liberalism that we get here in Massachusetts doesn't necessarily translate to much of the rest of the country.
Not going to see her windsurfing, I imagine, in any future ads coming down.
Exactly.
Before we let you go, though, I do want to ask you, following Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's primary victory, are there any House races in the 1st and 7th District that you have your eyes on, those two races in particular, that could sort of lead to some sort of a victory like hers?
Sure. Well, I think the closest race here in Massachusetts is the race between Ayanna Pressley and Mike Capuano. Ayanna Pressley is a 44-year-old Black woman, a Boston city councilor. And like in the New York race, she's challenging Mike Capuano, who's this older white male incumbent. And I think something that we've seen this year is that demographic difference, the fresh face, the woman of color, can potentially really take on and challenge an older, entrenched incumbent, despite the fact that, someone like Mike Capuano really has a lot of benefits of seniority in the House. But I think the difference with the New York race is that Ayanna Pressley and Mike Capuano are both incredibly liberal. So there's not a lot of policy differences between them. Capuano has been endorsed by civil rights icon John Lewis. He has a lot of support within the Black community, the gay community, among women. So I think that's going to be really an issue of, are people really focused on policy? Are they focused on experience, leadership style? The other race that's interesting to keep an eye on is Richard Neal, who's the ranking Democrat on the House Ways and Means Committee, is facing a challenge from Tahira Amatul Wadud, who is a Springfield attorney and a Muslim woman. And again, there's the question of, is someone's life story really qualifying them to take on someone who is kind of a very senior official in the House. She's also ran as a progressive from the left, focusing on income inequality, challenging Representative Neal on things like his support for trade deals, his closeness with business. But I think in the district, she is seen as somewhat of a long shot just because people like Representative Neal, they see him as someone who's really able to play the political game and bring the bacon home for the district. So I think the voters are going to have to think long and hard if they're willing to give up that kind of seniority in the House.
Shira Schoenberg, thank you so much for joining us, Shira.